Those who lose friends in battle know what battlefields are, and our Marylanders, with their dooryards strewed with the dead and dying, and their houses turned into hospitals for the wounded, know what battlefields are. But those who live far away from where war is taking place cannot know of the horrors, because they never have a way to experience them. They cannot hear the cries of the wounded, or see the dead spread out across the fields. This was true in all wars, until the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. During this war, photography was used to document all aspects of the war, for the first time in history. Without this documentation, the war would still have been seen as a distant event, with little immediate impact on most of the population, as would all wars, even in modern times. In the 1860s, photography was a relatively new medium. Therefore, it had not had the chance to develop multiple purposes, and was used only for portraits and landscapes. But as technology improved, from the daguerreotype, created in 1839 by Louis J. M. Daguerre, to the ambrotype and tintype, created in the 1850s by James Cutting and Hamilton Smith, photographs became easier and easier to create and distribute, and it became possible to use them for more artistic and imaginative purposes, and in more varied environments. A new opportunity came for photographers with the outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861. The Civil War was between the northern and southern states, referred to as the Union and the Confederacy. The war began because of political conflict, namely disagreement about the right to own slaves in American territories that had not yet become states. The Civil War was the bloodiest ever to be fought on American soil, leaving over 625,000 dead. While the Civil War was a turning point in many ways, both social and political, it was also a turning point in the way war was documented. The use of photography during the Civil War was a turning point in history because it changed people's perceptions of war by making those on the home front more aware of the horrors of war, and also creating the genre of photojournalism, inspiring future combat photographers. Up through the Victorian era, 1837 to 1901, war was highly romanticized. People believed that it was for the good of all and was a noble pursuit. Civil War photographs changed the way Americans viewed or perceived war in general. Romantic notions that they had held about handsome heroes on horseback, influenced by paintings and stories, were dashed once battlefield photographs were shown, circulated, or published, said Melissa McEwen, a professor at Transylvania University, who specializes in photography and in the memory of the Civil War. This was, of course, partially because before photography, those on the home front had no way to experience or fully comprehend the carnage. However, with the recently developed technology, it was possible for photographers to capture images of post-battle scenes. In fact, many made combat photography an occupation. One such man was Matthew Brady. He was the owner of a studio in New York City when the war began, and worked with such important figures as Abraham Lincoln. Brady employed a group of photographers such as Timothy O'Sullivan and Alexander Gardner to help him photograph the war. Eventually, Alexander Gardner separated from his partnership with Brady and became an equally famous photographer. The photographers had goals other than making money in mind.
Matthew Brady and the photographers who worked in his studio, including Alexander Gardner, at the very beginning of the war had this grand ambition that they were going to document this war in a way that wars had not been documented before. And both Brady and Gardner in particular were going to try to document as many battles as they could and to really capture this on film in a new way.
I think that many Civil War photographers wanted to show the brutality of warfare, but they also wanted to reveal that the war was being conducted by ordinary Americans, people who were not just fighting on the battlefield, but who were also building the roads, camps, and materials necessary to execute the war. Melissa McEwen. Unfortunately, in 1861, it was still a slow process to capture images. Sometimes a photograph required between 10 seconds and 2 minutes of exposure time, so it was impossible to photograph the war in action. Even so, Brady and his team were responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of Civil War photographs. As with any art, the creator wishes to display it. So, in 1862, Brady's collection, The Dead of Antietam, was shown at a gallery in New York. There, it exposed those who were not directly involved in the war to destruction that was taking place hundreds of miles away. As one reporter for the New York Times famously wrote, "Mr. Brady has done something to bring home to us the terrible reality and earnestness of war. If he has not brought bodies and laid them in our dooryards and along the streets, he has done something very like it." The reporter also described how people reacted to the exhibit. "There's a terrible fascination about it that draws one near these pictures, and makes him loth to leave them. You will see hushed, reverent groups standing around these weird copies of carnage, bending down to look in the pale faces of the dead, chained by the strange spell that dwells in dead men's eyes." For example, this photograph was taken after the Battle of Gettysburg, showing both Union and Confederate soldiers dead. Where previously, the scenes of these soldiers' deaths would have been thought of only by close friends and family, this graphic image was displayed to the public, leaving very little to the imagination. This image, and more like it, was what caused the change in the public's views of the war. Primarily, photography helped connect the home front and the battlefront. With the use of photographic technology, it was cheap and easy to create an image of a father, brother, son, or friend sent off to battle. It was their most visceral, closest link to their loved ones. For girlfriends or wives at home, the only thing they had was the ambrotype, said Bob Zeller, president of the Center for Civil War Photography. Portraits were also very important to the soldiers sent off to war.
An average soldier might take with him to battle a portrait of a loved one, somebody at home, and that photo itself became like a surrogate for the people they left behind. And so that was a very meaningful image. And certainly those at home maybe felt the same way, but I think the soldiers felt that more strongly.
Nonetheless, the overall impact that the images of the Civil War had on the country was not a pleasant one, leading to people's first understanding of the horrors of war. But the images did more than that. They made way for an entirely new genre that would remain present in today's culture worldwide: war and combat photography. Every war since the Civil War has been documented by photographs, a direct effect of Brady's and his team's work.
These were photographs that had an impact, made a difference, educated a lot of people, and it would not surprise me at all if that was part of what motivated future photographers.
These photographs can be very influential in the war itself, motivating one side or the other to change tactics, but they often affect those not directly involved, sometimes people hundreds or thousands of miles away. However, these photographs can motivate people in many different ways. One way is that it can motivate people to protest the war and work for peace. A perfect example of this is the Vietnam War. Of course, there was already a large group opposed to the war in the first place. But as images began to be released depicting the horrors of the fighting in Vietnam, protests of the war grew exponentially in size. You can really see this begin to take place when the live footage of the war was broadcast directly to the United States. In fact, the anti-war movement in America in the late 60s and early 70s was so large that it dictated the political agenda and became one of the largest cultural events of the 20th century. However, sometimes the photographs can create the opposite effect. An example of this is in the Soviet Union during World War II and the Holocaust. The images that people saw were so grisly and captured such injustices that they motivated people to fight and increased the Soviets' hatred of their enemies, the Nazis. There are many other examples of combat photography in modern conflicts. Some of our most interesting and heartbreaking photos were taken during the 20th and 21st centuries. It is very important that we understand that many of society's current opinions of war and the idea of its documentation stem from the photographs taken during the Civil War.